Come on in, pull up a chair. There's a story between the verses. Real talk, real faith, life, healing, growth, and grace. You're listening to Between the Verses with Kelli LaVerne.
Welcome to Between the Verses, real talk, real faith with Kelli LaVerne. This is Eavesdrop, where we listen a little closer to the women between the verses. Girlfriends and guys, in case you're listening too. Today, we have to have another talk. I know, I already know, but you'll want to hear this. But first, if you missed our last episode, go back and check it out. Episode 11, Gomer. Listen, all of them are good, but you definitely want to check out Gomer. And also, while I'm taking a pause, be sure to join our online Facebook community. Just search Between the Verses podcast community. Join us there. You can connect with other listeners, share your thoughts, ask questions, and let me know what these stories might be stirring up for you, or if you can relate to any of them, or if you're even learning something. If you like them, give me a yay, a nay, a shout out, let me know. I almost forgot more exciting news. Working on a website that'll end up being our central hub for everything, for connecting, where you can find episodes, any information. Now, it's going to take some while to get it set up. So yes, join the Facebook community. I tried to keep it where most people already are, so you don't have another thing to keep track of. But there are some people who are not on Facebook. And also, Facebook went down last month. It was short-lived. I don't even know if you caught it. But this is just a reminder to anybody doing business, ministry, entrepreneur, like whatever you're doing. If you're trying to have your own thing, your own lane, it's always good to have your own website, so you won't be stuck when other sites go down. Just putting that out there. Catch it if you will, but it's important. Just keep that in mind. All right, so let's get into it. So today, we need to talk about Esther. I already know, but this one is different because most people already know Esther. They know the crown, they know the beauty, they know the king, they know the famous line, "For such a time as this." But honestly, I think Esther's story gets oversimplified. Now, wait, before we go any further, I just want to tell you, we know Esther has her own book in the Bible. The key pieces that we're going to be talking about, well, actually, you should just read the entire book. If you've already read it, portions of it, go back and read it again, especially after listening to this verse. And I always say that this podcast, and I always say that because you might pick up, something new that you didn't even catch, or that I didn't catch, or you might be able to see how this connects for yourself. So I always encourage you to go back and check it out for yourself. So in the book of Esther chapters, it's a lot of them. So you might want to write this down or replay it, pause it, rewind it, so you can get all the scriptures in. You won't go wrong with the whole book, but Esther chapter 2, verses 5 to 18. Esther, well, you might as well go to 20. Esther chapter 2, verses 5 to 18. And then key verses are also Esther 2, verse 10 and 20. Then Esther chapter 3, verses 1 to 15. Esther chapter 4, verses 1 to 17. Esther chapters 5 and 7. Let me see. Specifically in chapter 7, verses 1 to 10. And then Esther chapters 8, 9, and Esther chapter 10. So like I said, the whole book, right? Go back and check it out. So now where were we? We were talking about how most people know the famous line, "For such a time as this." But I think Esther's story gets oversimplified, especially after looking into this a little bit more, getting in between those verses. Because Esther's story isn't really about becoming a queen. Her story is about what happened after she became queen. And those two things are very different. Now I'm going to give you the rundown like we do, because Eve, that was about influence. Sarah was about waiting. Ruth, that was faith before the outcome. Gomer, you got to go back. That was drifting and being restored. But Esther is about being placed somewhere you never planned to be and discovering that the position comes with responsibility. How about that? She's placed somewhere she never planned to be. So let's look at her life. Her life started with loss. Before the crown, before the palace, before the fancy robes, before the title, before any of that, she lost her parents. We kind of breeze through that, right? But scripture tells us that she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai. We kind of just breeze by that, you know? I can speak to this now, and some others may be able to as well, but losing your parents changing things. It changes how you see security. It changes how you see belonging. It changes how you see yourself. And from the beginning, Esther's life is shaped by circumstances she didn't choose. She didn't choose to become an orphan. I mean, what orphan does, right? She didn't choose where she grew up. She didn't choose the losses she experienced. And honestly, a lot of us know what that's like. Like I said, I could attest to not having my parents, but I was blessed to have them, until recently. I'm a full grown adult and it's just a recent thing for me. I can't even imagine as a young child. And we know she was a child because an adult doesn't have to be raised. And so she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai. But let's keep going. Now, before we get to the palace, I think we need to sit here for a minute because Esther spends most of her early life learning how to survive. She was a Jewish orphan living in Persia, not Jerusalem, not among her own people, not where most people would expect a Bible story to unfold. She's part of a people who have experienced exile, displacement, loss, generational uncertainty. And sometimes I wonder what conversation she had with Mordecai. Like how was that growing up? What dreams she had, what thought that she had, for her future to look like. Because I can just about promise you this. Becoming a queen probably wasn't on her vision board, considering her background. Not even close. And I think that's important. It wasn't even a thought for her. Because before Esther was a queen, she was just a young woman trying to live her life. She was human, trying to find her place, trying to figure out who she was. And here's another thing people forget about Esther. She wasn't living her life preparing for a crown. Most people in scripture aren't preparing for the thing God eventually uses them for. Have you noticed that in any of the episodes that we've shared so far? I mean, even if we think about Moses, he wasn't preparing for Pharaoh. David wasn't preparing for Goliath. He was out there with the sheep. And we just talked about Ruth a couple episodes ago, and she wasn't preparing for Boaz. So we can see how Esther wasn't preparing for a palace. She was simply being faithful in the life that she had. And you know what? We can stop there because that'll preach on its own. She was simply being faithful in the life that she had. Now, we'll keep going. Otherwise, it'll be too short, right? So let's keep going. Here's some tea people don't talk about. Esther didn't even apply to be queen, right? When King Ahasuerus removed Queen Vashti, a search began. Yeah, I had to pause over that name, y'all. I'm just keeping it real. I had to pause for a minute. But when he removed Queen Vashti, notice that he removed her. Let's hold on to that one. A search began, and the young women were gathered and taken, brought to the palace, and Esther was one of them. So this wasn't where somebody went around and said, who wants to be queen? And Esther raised her hand and said, pick me. And I don't know, maybe she would have, who knows? But the fact of the matter is they went on a hunt, found young women. They were gathered up and taken and brought to the palace. They didn't have a choice. This wasn't a career opportunity. She wasn't pursuing a dream. This wasn't her big break. She was taken, placed into a system she didn't create, placed into circumstances she didn't control, placed into a future she couldn't predict. And honestly, when I look at this changes how I read her story. It's because so many of us are trying to figure out purpose in places we never planned to be. She never planned to be there. Now, here's what I love. The crown wasn't the goal. Because Esther never spends any time in her book, the book of Esther, chasing power. She wasn't looking for power. She never spends the book trying to become important. She never spends the book trying to become influential. Most of the time, she's simply responding to what's in front of her. And I think that's worth noticing because sometimes God positions people before they understand why. Sometimes purpose arrives described as, what's that word again? Interruption. Now, I can't imagine being just taken, from my home, off the street, wherever, and gathered up with a bunch of other women and going to the palace so that a king could pick a queen. And we always think of that, as glamorous. Oh, wow, she's, the queen, she's the queen, beautiful. We see, talk about how she had to prepare herself and all the treatment she had. And we just look at that as royalty and like, wow, I would love that. But really, the times, the culture, I mean, literally taken, all taken. All right. I don't know why I'm stuck there, but I just can't imagine it. I mean, right now, what is the closest? All right, we think about in England and, the prince, there's two of one of them is not in England. I don't know, whatever, but the prince that's still in England. Can you just imagine if somebody just rounded up women and you're one of them and they just whisk you away and tell you you're going to go so he can pick a wife, a new queen? I can't even imagine. I can't even, fame, fortune, money, clothes, glamour, whatever. I still can't even imagine. But back to Esther. Now, eventually, something about Esther stands out. Something stands out. She gains favor, not just with the king, but with the people around her, with those overseeing the process. And listen, that matters because favor isn't always about talent. Sometimes it's about character. Sometimes it's about wisdom. Sometimes it's about how you carry yourself. Esther wasn't fighting for attention. She wasn't demanding recognition. She wasn't forcing herself into the spotlight, and somehow she stood out anyway. She stood out. And here's where it gets interesting, because she becomes queen and everything looks successful, everything looks settled, everything looks complete. But there's one problem. Nobody knows who she really is. Esther is Jewish, but Mordecai told her not to reveal it. So now she's living with a secret. And girlfriend, let's just tell the truth. That can be exhausting. Living with a secret, trying to hide it, trying to remember to hide it. But anyway, it's exhausting being accepted, but not fully known, being valued, but wondering what happens if people discover the rest of her story. And I think a lot of people can understand that feeling. You know, what happens if they find out what I did, or who I was, or who I am? She was living with all that. You know, she wasn't just living with being the queen, a role that she never asked for. Okay? So let's make this real, though, because this isn't just Esther. This is about being in a room where nobody knows your whole story, being successful, but still feeling pressure, being in a position that looks good from the outside while carrying weight nobody else sees. This is asking, why am I here? What am I supposed to do with this? And what happens if people really know who I am? Right? So we got to bring in, Haman. I know we're doing eavesdrop, but sometimes we got to talk about the men in the stories to kind of get the whole story or understand the story between the verses. So Haman, see, this is some real tea here. The villain in the book of Esther isn't power, it's pride. It's pride. One man refuses to bow to Haman. One. And that happened to be Mordecai, who happened to have raised Esther. And Haman becomes so consumed by his wounded ego that he decides one man isn't enough. He wants the entire group of people destroyed. He didn't just want to go after Mordecai. He wanted to wipe out that entire group of people. Think about that. His pride almost caused genocide. That pride is a dangerous thing. My goodness. And you know what? It still happens today. Maybe not on the same scale, but wounded pride still destroys relationships, still destroys families, churches, businesses, friendships. Because pride always wants more than it deserves. So now everything changes because Esther discovers the decree affects her too. So he put out a decree to kill all of the people, and that affects her too. Her people, her family line, her identity, everything she's hidden. Suddenly, silence isn't safe anymore. And that's the problem. Because now she has to decide, keep protecting herself or risk everything. And we know Mordecai, he sends word to her. Now, remind you, she's in the palace. Mordecai didn't get to go with her, right? So he has to send word to her. And he tells her, you need to go to the king. And Esther responds honestly, if I go without being called, I could die. And let's be clear here. This isn't weakness. This isn't fear as to being afraid. This is reality because the risk was real. The danger was real. The consequences were real. And I think that is important because courage isn't pretending something isn't scary. Courage is moving despite the fear and even sometimes while you're still afraid. See, in that time, and this is where, we go so fast through these stories. That culture, if you didn't go to the king unless you were summoned for, unless you were called for. It wasn't like, yeah, that, was his queen, his wife. But it wasn't a situation where, like today, wives just go up to their husband or just, you have full access. Rightly so, right? That's your spouse. But back then, that wasn't the case. You did not go without being called, or you could be put to death. That's just the way it was. So she's considering all of this. All of this is going through her mind. Her people gets wiped out, or she would have to reveal herself and possibly, the same could still happen. Now it would include her. But you know what? This is one of my favorite facts about the book of Esther. The book of Esther never mentions God by name. Not once. And I said it's my favorite fact because his name is not mentioned, but he's everywhere. He's in the timing. He's in the favor. He's in the delays. He's in the people crossing path. He's in the sleepless nights, in the details lining up. And maybe somebody listening needs to hear this because sometimes God feels quiet. Sometimes heaven feels silent. Sometimes you're looking for a sign. And Esther reminds us, God can be working even when he isn't speaking loudly. Somebody needs to hear that. So then Mordecai says something that changes everything. What if you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Whew, that's the moment. That is the moment. That's the moment. That's the moment. Because now, this is where we see this isn't about a crown. It's about purpose. This isn't about status. It's about responsibility. And suddenly, Esther realizes maybe where I am isn't random. Now, we notice in the book of Esther, she didn't panic. She didn't rush. She doesn't immediately run to the king. She fasts, she prays, she gathers people to fast with her. And then she says, if I perish, I perish. And that's not recklessness. That's resolve. She's resolved that she is going to do this. She's praying. She's fasting. She has others. And now she's committed it to God. See, this isn't her giving up. This isn't her being reckless or careless or whatever. This isn't her not having faith. This is resolve. It's in God's hands. So if I perish, I perish. God's got it. In other words, this is my end. It was meant to be. God's got it. And now here's some more tea. When Esther finally approaches the king, she still doesn't reveal everything. This woman is wise, right? We mentioned earlier, sometimes you can find favor because of your wisdom, your character, how you carry yourself. She's wise. She hosts a banquet. And then another banquet. Now, we know the saying that there's the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, right? But I don't know if that was the case, but it definitely shows us that she understood timing. She used wisdom here. She understood strategy. And some of us can learn from just that piece alone. Timing, strategy. Esther didn't win because she had more power. She won because she knew when to speak. She knew when to speak. Eventually, a moment arrives and she reveals her identity and she exposes Haman's plan, and everything shifts. The hidden woman now becomes visible. The silent queen now has a voice. And the position she never asked God for becomes the very thing God uses. The very thing. So, what's the real tea? The real tea is this. The crown wasn't the miracle at all. The courage was. A lot of people want the position. Fewer people want the responsibility that comes with it. Esther could have stayed comfortable, protected, silent, kept her mouth closed. And honestly, nobody would have blamed her. Nobody would have blamed her. But she chose purpose over comfort. And that's what changed everything. The real tea is this. God didn't place Esther somewhere important because she was ready. He helped her become ready after she got there. And that's another word for somebody. Because you keep thinking, when I'm ready, I'll step up. But maybe God is saying, step up and I'll help you grow into it. All right, here's our Monday move. Now, again, please go back and read the story of Esther. But as you can gather from our talk, she won. The king heard her. People were saved. She didn't lose, her life after risking it. First of all, hiding who she was. And second of all, going to the king unannounced. But our Monday move. Now, for those that may be just joining in, our Monday move came about because we're not hearers only, we're doers. So when we hear things, when we discover things, when we learn new things, when we see in between the verses, we want to take that knowledge and do something with it. So this is what I call the Monday move. Ask yourself, where am I at right now that I didn't choose, but might actually matter? Where am I now? Where am I at right now that I didn't choose, but might actually matter? Maybe this doesn't apply to you, and that's okay too. And then ask, what responsibility have I been avoiding because it feels too big? Because maybe you're more prepared than you think. Just maybe. If it doesn't apply, hopefully you learned something. And please, like, share, and subscribe. I always forget to say that. I'm trying to get in the habit of it. Yes, please. Like, subscribe, and share. Share, like, subscribe, however you want to do it. But maybe you are more prepared than you think. You never know until you try. So if you've been feeling like you're carrying something heavy, you're in a place you didn't expect, you're wondering why, why, God, did this responsibility land on me? Why do I have to do this? Let me say this clearly. It might not be random. It might be purpose. All right, I'm going to leave that right there because Esther's story, it really isn't about becoming a queen. It's about becoming the woman willing to risk everything after she became queen. And if you've been asking, why am I here? Maybe the better question is, what am I supposed to do now that I am? All right, I'll meet you back right here next time. We know that new episodes drop Monday mornings, so I'll see you then, right here between the verses. Real talk, real faith with Kelli LaVerne, from Sunday to Monday and the rest of the week too.
Before you go, don't forget, subscribe, like, and share, and join the conversation. Search Facebook for Between the Verses Podcast Community. Until next time, keep growing, keep believing, and keep walking by faith between the verses with Kelli LaVerne.